So next up, we have our Outstate Entrepreneurship panel. I would like to welcome the moderator, Matt Lewis, Matt is with Greater MSP. He serves as Director of Make It MSP. Matt, do you want to step up here? And then we'll bring on the panelists.
I'll stay up here so we can pass the mics. While we're getting set up, thanks for having me. As was said, I'm Matt Lewis with Greater MSP. I work for a public-private economic development partnership focused on accelerating jobs and investment in the 16-county metropolitan statistical area of the Greater Minneapolis-St. Paul region. And it's not in my day job that I work to support entrepreneurs, but as many of the folks in this room know, I've kind of get sucked into that ecosystem. I see a lot of friendly faces here over the last couple years, and I've had the privilege to get to work with a lot of people who are building the ecosystem in our region, from entrepreneurs and investors to community leaders and many others. And I've learned a few things, and I've been kind of a passionate voice within my own partnership of thinking how, as we grow up and evolve, how we can best support entrepreneurs in our region. And the reason I'm really passionate about that, a couple reasons. It's my own personal story. My family coming here to Minnesota and seeing that as a child, seeing my father build a business here and the support he got from our ecosystem, and seeing that path to economic independence for our family, knowing the national statistics that the Kauffman Foundation and others put out that's showing that net new job creation in America is disproportionately, the majority is created by startup enterprises. And selfishly, for the initiative I direct day to day, we see that actually the state of an entrepreneurial ecosystem and the support for innovators in a region is one of the top indicators for the talent attraction and some of the issues that Mary Grove spoke to, as we're seeing in our data that people are leaving regions like San Francisco and coming to places like Minnesota. And so over the last year or two, I've kind of gotten sucked into this ecosystem and have run into people like Mary across the country and tried to take advantage of the position I have to reach out to other communities around the country and see how they're building their ecosystems. And I would agree with what Mary shared as the 5 ingredients, in part because I've heard her share that story a few times now. But also I would add kind of 3 things I've noticed as kind of an outsider into this community over the past year in terms of building an ecosystem. The first is that people drive an ecosystem and institutions tend to follow. And sometimes I work for a partnership of institutions. Sometimes we can forget that and take the lead, but the more that we're listening to entrepreneurs and investors and collaborators like the people in this room and asking what you need and following and trying to provide the conditions to allow you to succeed, the better off we'll be. And I've learned a lot from following people like Scott Burns in our ecosystem, other people in this room, and kind of asking what the conditions are and trying to figure out how we can support. The second thing I've learned is that ecosystems need to be porous. And there are leaders who have been at this for a long time that we need to follow. For those of us who are new to these ecosystems, they need to be porous to allow people like Mary who move in, who have expertise from around the country and the world, or Eric, who I've gotten to know over the last couple of years, but also people who are new to this ecosystem who disproportionately don't have the opportunity and privilege that I've had in coming into this ecosystem. You hear the statistics that Mary cites around the challenges, particularly that women and people of color and new Americans have accessing that ecosystem. It needs to be porous, and it also needs to allow people to step away. Because as we know, you need to be able to fail forward in an entrepreneurial ecosystem. People need to be able to come and go. And so opportunities like this to connect a community and the role that an institution like St. Cloud State can play to provide that convening space is really important. And the third thing I've learned is that all the challenges and opportunities, depending on how you phrase it, that we have in any entrepreneurial ecosystem around the country tend to boil down to connectivity. You heard about the 5 conditions that Mary shared, from talent to access to capital, right? All those things. Some people talk about publicity and access to the media. You just heard from Scott, he needs introductions to potential customers. It's all about that speed to connectivity, right? And time is that challenge. And so those are some of the things that I've learned and I'm trying to apply in our region. But here today I'm joined by a great panel of experts whose bios are in your document. So I'm gonna have actually questions that allow them to share anything else that they think you might need to understand about what they're bringing to this conversation, but ask them a specific question about their point of view, and then we'll hash out a few questions, I think, between us as a panel. So I'm going to start first with Wade. And Wade, you can share a little bit about yourself, but I have a specific question for you to start. So you've had 3 technology exits here in the state of Minnesota and outside the Minneapolis-St. Paul region. And so I'm curious, what did you learn are the advantages to building a company and investing in a company in Greater Minnesota?
One, I didn't want to move. So I'm based out of Rochester, Minnesota, and the reality is when we got started, we tried to find friends or colleagues that had skill that we thought would work for the company. And obviously, where you're living is going to be the most lucrative place to probably find that talent. And the other co-founder, Joe Shriver, he was in Minneapolis. I was in Rochester. I worked at IBM at the time. And there's a great talent pool there in Rochester. So that was the one thing that we knew we had to grab people close that we could. So we actually hired somebody from Duluth, Minnesota, who ended up moving to Rochester and then moved to the Twin Cities. But we really didn't care. I think the hard part, we didn't want to compete with the Minneapolis talent at that point, partly because we kind of looked at ourselves like a small market baseball team. You know, Minneapolis had a lot of talent there, but the thing was, is those people were jumping jobs left and right. So we wanted to find some people that would stay. So one of the things that we were fortunate through our existence of 2008 to 2016 was we had no employees leave. And that was really kind of the key. So we found employees, likely our goal was 5 years at a major company, either the Mayo Clinic or most of them from IBM. That worked really, really well because they're about 5 years being an engineer. So the nice part is they weren't just a college graduate. They had some experience at the enterprise level, which was important. But I think that was the biggest key is we found the loyalty factor. More than anything kept us. So you think about all the time you spend developing talent, and then if they leave in a year or two, it's really hard. So for us, we just kept keeping those employees. And the funny thing is then they would find their colleagues or friends, and that's really how we got all of our employees. They would say, hey, I want to find somebody just as good or better than me. So suddenly, when you kind of go up the chain, you find some really good talent, and as a result, it turned out pretty good.
It's interesting. The statistics actually bear out that the Minneapolis-St. Paul region, the broader state of Minnesota, has historically done really great at retaining talent. And as we're seeing in some of the more expensive markets across the country, like San Francisco, people are leaving those places. Our net migration, Mary mentioned, moved positive as a state, and it's actually accelerated. It's been positive in the metro region for a few years, and that strength has been because fewer people are leaving. And so that bears out across the state, so thank you. Neela, I'm curious, what are the opportunities or the challenges, depending on how you want to talk about it, in kind of building and supporting entrepreneurial communities across the state of Minnesota and greater Minnesota? So you've been kind of leading out of Red Wing and Red Wing Ignite, and what have you learned so far, and what could we possibly learn in this part of the state from what you're focused on in Red Wing?
Yeah, first, from the challenges in...
I can pass this on here.
Okay. Yep, now it's on. Some of the challenges and the opportunities. Matt and I were at a meeting last week, and Kaufman was presenting, similar to what Mary had just said before us, that innovation thrives in denser networks, and that for rural America, that is a real challenge. I see density as a challenge, but I also see it as an opportunity. It's an opportunity because if we work together, we have the density amongst greater Minnesota. So there's not one city in greater Minnesota that has the volume of people, events, contests, risk capital. But together, we do. And so early stages of launching Red Wing Ignite, I, out of pure necessity, learned that collaboration and working with others was necessary to properly support the entrepreneur. Another challenge that I saw, which is not only in greater Minnesota, but is the tendency for cities, organizations, universities to have more personal interest or inward interest versus collective interest. And it's natural. There's time, there's trust, usually internal goals, funding requirements by all these organizations. But the opportunity there is southern Minnesota, what we're working on, is really working to knock down the barriers between various organizations. We're really trying to work together across various sectors to put the entrepreneur in the center and really find a pathway to that entrepreneur. This is elevating the work of all the organizations, increasing their sustainability. It's increasing the regional competitiveness of greater Minnesota. And obviously, it's the best approach forward for the entrepreneur and investors.
Terrific. Eric, you've been here in Minnesota for what, maybe 2 years now? 2 years. I remember when you first moved and we shared a bond over the fact that we don't maybe agree on the same NFL team, but we both went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, so I had my heart broken twice this weekend. So you've been here for a couple of years. Something not everybody might know about you is you actually raised $40 million for a startup in Madison, which isn't considered to be a hotbed of venture capital necessarily. So now you've been here for a couple years. How would you assess the landscape of kind of available capital and funding here in the state of Minnesota?
Absolutely. Thanks, Matt. You beat me to the punch on the football joke. I was going to say Wisconsin and Minnesota. It was a great metaphor yesterday. They're tied for #1 in my heart. But as far as actual deployed capital in our two states go, though, I was looking into this before this conversation. $247 million have been invested into Minnesota companies in the first half of this year. That's opposed to $126 million in Wisconsin. So even though Wisconsin actually has the higher population, Minnesota is 2 to 1 in terms of dollars invested into companies. I think that exists because we have kind of the entire flywheel that can exist for a company to get started all the way to a bigger corporation in the Twin Cities or in the entire state of Minnesota to be a likely acquirer for these companies. My 2 cents, I guess, going forward is not just to focus on the $247 million that is getting invested every 6 months, but also to focus on what percentage of that is actually coming from in-state Minnesota investors. I think aspirationally, we should always be striving that we're deploying more money into our own ecosystems, and I think that really only happens with entrepreneurial success stories, where wealth is created through an exit or through an IPO of one of these companies, and then it finds its way back into its own backyard. So I think Minnesota actually probably has a head start from my home state that way, but I think that we've got a long way to go, and I'm hoping that every great North company in the next several years provides a return that allows the Webbers to just continue to do the work they're doing.
Terrific. My next question is for Sandy. So Sandy, you've built quite a name for yourself, not only as a business owner, but as someone who is really passionate about energizing other people who are maybe prospective entrepreneurs or current entrepreneurs to kind of see the potential in the opportunity that's in front of them. Can you talk about kind of what you see as the opportunity for entrepreneurs here to mentor each other and give back and be a critical part of that part of the flywheel?
Sure, and in 3 minutes, I guess. So first of all, I'm a visionary, and I grew up in community development, graduated from St. Cloud State in community development, so I see relationship and visionary approaches in everything. And so the collective brilliance sitting around the tables today, and actually a lot of the brilliance that's not even sitting here, is the answer in my mind. And I'll speak just very candidly and hopefully without offensively saying anything, but I'll tell you what it's like to be an entrepreneur in Outstate Minnesota. I'm in agribusiness, and what I always say is by default. My husband 15 years ago died of cancer and left me with this business I knew nothing about, and I'm still here. And the question the pondering point that I would have for everybody today is, are we sure we're not ready for more than a collaborative, but more for a movement to go beyond collaborative? Because I think we are ready in this area for that. And what I mean by that is it goes beyond collaborative. And what I would say as an outstate Minnesota person, I've chosen to network in different places and not necessarily just in St. Cloud to get my needs met. And in some ways I've quit networking altogether because it was hard as a woman in agribusiness to get any attention. And I don't play the victim card very well. It was just a truth. And so you asked me the question, I'll tell you the truth because I think the truth is part of the answer. The opportunity that is sitting in this brilliant collective today may not look like us. I just came back from a conference in Chicago last week, and it was women who own certified women-owned companies. And the opportunities for women and minorities to go after government and large agency programs might be something that we want to tap into here. We've only dabbled, and I can fall on the sword and say for my own company, we've laid in the weeds a lot in that. And some of it was over the last 15 years, me rebuilding my own life, and then not knowing which tangent to go after. So it is really amazing to me, and I've written a bunch of notes, so if anyone wants to have a sidebar, I have a lot of ideas, and I think it is absolutely right for us to to go after the intersection of innovation, technology, agribusiness, and how it relates back to health. That intersection is golden here in Minnesota, and how agribusiness has shifted even in the last year is overwhelming to me, to the point where I've dabbled to wanting to get out, to really blasting out a bigger vision and knowing that I need a different direction and probably different leadership in order to do that. I've been with the company for 15 years as the sole owner, and we go from stages of burnout to inspiration to not wanting to play the game to wanting to play the game on a larger level. And I think that as leaders here, we need to look within our own collaboratives and say, am I a part of the cog that's holding this together and raising us up to what could be a movement? Or am I a part of something that's slowing me down because of my own agenda, or slowing our group collaborative down because of my own agenda and wanting to protect my own interest in it? And in order for us to get to a better platform or a larger movement type platform where we can really make St. Cloud and the Midwest and Minneapolis and this whole region what we're wanting it to do, is to cross those boundaries and go from collaborative into co-creative, which means we're bringing different players into the table that might not quite look like us around the table.
I think that's terrific. And in going back to that theme of kind of speed to connectivity, I think one of the unique challenges in this part of the country that some other parts of the world don't experience is that speed to radical candor. And so I think that the more that we can be honest about some of the challenges and opportunities that are in front of us and be honest and direct, I think that the better off we'll be. So thank you for that. Mark, I want to follow up on something that Sandy mentioned too about the future of health. So I have a lot of questions for you because we're 6 weeks away from an election, but I'll save those for the networking room. My question for you has been, in the last few years, you've been around the world leading the effort to bring the World's Fair here and specifically focused on the future of health. And I'm wondering what you see as the opportunities as you've been around selling this state across the world for entrepreneurs and investors and others in greater Minnesota in the global economy. What's our opportunity to have a leadership position?
Well, there's sort of two big buckets and then one I want to really hammer on today. One of the big buckets is that it's necessary in this world's global market for people to have a way to think about who we are as the people here in our region. There's lots of talk, are we Midwest, are we North, whatever. But it is absolutely a fact that in this current moment in our national politics and in the international situation, people need to think about Minnesota, all of Minnesota, in a way that they can get a handle on. And frankly, we chose the theme of health for two reasons that happen to be very complementary. One is, of course, that inside of our state and region, we both are known for our really amazing, internationally famous institutions, the Mayos, University of Minnesota, Medtronic, United, and we're the folks with the most exercise and bike trails and people staying healthy and long-lived and all of those other aspects of self-help and taking care of ourselves. So we have a balanced, very dramatic, internationally famous, what some people have called the center of the universe for health innovation, and simultaneously, most of the world is really interested in the question of health, healthcare, the cost of healthcare, the lack of access to healthcare, innovation, you name it. When you enter into a conversation with a head of state, a foreign minister, an economics minister, whoever, it goes almost immediately to health, medicine, epidemics, the world situation, obesity, diabetes. It's amazing. So those two factors mean keeping Minnesota's image and reputation in the health and wellness arena strong and deeper and wider is crucial to connecting to a personal interest. Because a head of state will start telling you about his mother or his grandmother in a minute. But the second part of that story about the World's Fair is that people need to have something to get them to think about Minnesota or to come here once. I mean, we all make this as a joke. You can't get people to come to your company or to your school or whatever, but if you can get them here once, then you can't get rid of them. We joke about this. We found this the case in our expo bid, and so we're making up excuses to invite heads of state and others to come. And you'll be shocked. Like, we invited the new Prime Minister of Ethiopia. I said, well, we're going to have you speak at a conference in the fall. And they wrote back and said, well, we can't come in the fall, but we're going to be in Los Angeles next week, and we could stop in Minnesota on the way back. And by the way, we rented the Target Center. Why? There's 40,000 Ethiopians, mostly Oromo, and the new Prime Minister is Oromo. And inside the Target Center, just a couple weeks ago, there were 20-some thousand Ethiopians in a rally about Ethiopia. But you know, when you talk to everybody, they're almost all entrepreneurs, right? So when you start to dig into the new communities, the diasporas, the others who are in our midst, there were 20-some thousand in the Target Center from Ethiopia. It did feel like an Obama rally inside that building. And so this is a second part of this equation, is reaching out and not being afraid to, just consider everybody around us an entrepreneur, a potential entrepreneur, but a connection to another country, to another place. Then the final thing is really thinking about rural America and rural Minnesota. And I have had the really great fortune of knowing a lot of entrepreneurs, but also the organized groups that help entrepreneurs in our community. Jeff Smedrew's here in the back, but who was one of the founders of Communicating for Agriculture, based in Fergus Falls, and now part of Communicating for America. But it's always been in that larger organized way that we could put some characteristics around the kind of businesses. For example, the idea of moving factories from some other place was really never a good idea. Helping people start and maintain businesses, that was a good idea. Service-based, technology-based, things that really are advanced are the kind of businesses that can help rural communities. And then we have to have the housing. We have to have the hospitals and healthcare. We have to have the things that people need. So there are organizations like Communicating for Agriculture and others who've really helped to lead and guide a kind of new way of thinking about that entrepreneurial activity in small towns. When I was Secretary of State, it was the good years and the bad years, so to speak, 08, 09, 010. Some of you remember, some of you don't. You're lucky. But we had 60 to 65,000 new businesses filed with my office every year in this state. Other state secretaries of state just couldn't believe it's that many. And that doesn't include people operating as sole proprietorships. There's a lot of people jumping into the water of entrepreneurship. Not all of them want to grow. Some want to just take care of their families. Not all of them know exactly what the future might hold, but they just have vision and hope and drive. And so this state is special. The statistics on just the investment community. But from my point of view, this expo, this World's Fair, is the kind of thing that gives Minnesota a big unifying project, and it's got fantastic bipartisan support. President Obama and President Trump, both houses of Congress. So within that context, this congressman from right here, Tom Emmer, was able to lift Minnesota into the position of being probably the host for the 2027 World's Fair, and it's the kind of thing that the whole state can celebrate. The rest of the world can come check us out, and while they're here, we can talk business with these people coming to visit us from around the world.
Well, I had all these amazing questions, and we're just getting started, I feel, but I'm getting the hook. So I want to ask these amazing people who are up on the stage if any of them have a specific call to action for this group today, something that we should take with us as we leave this room and this great event that's been put forward today. Does anyone have any call to action for the group? Sandy?
I think what was on the screen at the beginning of Unleash Amazing is absolutely perfect for what we have the power to do here today, or to start, or to continue, and maybe to upscale or up-level on some level. And what I would, my idea might be is take a look at who's already sitting in your collaboratives and see what kind of other people you might invite as creative thinkers. Maybe there are some outstate Minnesota type companies that could come in, because those types of companies are really good at scrapping and turning a nickel into a dollar and having really innovative ideas. And I've often been told many times that I have a third eye because I just think so differently, or looked at weird. And one thing is to remember that it's okay to be different, and that was one one of the first things that I had to tell myself is, lady, you're not a dude. You don't look like all of them in agribusiness. And this was 15 years ago. And to make our differences collectively be okay. We're not Silicon Valley, but how could we be even greater than that? And what sort of creative thinkers do we need around our table that might be different than who we have here today to help solve this problem? And a lot of it, like Mary said, is in our youth.
I think that's a terrific note to end on. Join me in giving a round of applause to our panel.